Hi Vaishali, hi everyone.
Hi Gaurav.
Hi.
Hi, good evening. Am I audible to all?
Yes, we can hear you, Dana.
Perfect. All right.
Let's give it a couple of minutes. I think, I think at 4 as well. We usually see folks joining in by 4, 5.
Yes, I agree with you. So just for the mic checks. Yeah, thank you.
And Dana, I hope you've enabled screen share for Gaurav.
Yes.
Awesome, thanks.
So guys, I just wanted to test my screen. I'll just present my slide. Just confirm if you are seeing the presenter view. Sorry, not the presenter view, but the other one.
Yes, we are. We can see your screen.
Let me just go back. So you can see the presentation, right? Not the presenter notes. Okay.
No, not the presenter notes. Yes, yeah.
Sure, sure. So while I would be speaking, I'll switch off the camera. I hope that should be fine, right?
Sure, that should be
fine.
fine.
I'm presenting, yeah. All right.
Yeah, Vaishali, as per the agenda, I think you go first. So that's the agenda with me.
Yes, I think, once you do a quick intro, I'll just take like the previous one that we had. I'll probably take a couple of minutes to just introduce them to the program that we're running. And if you want to quickly highlight, I think from your perspective or the MSH work across respect to startups, I think that'll be great as well. And then we could just segue into Gaurav's presentation.
Right, thank you.
Hi, Taina. I would request you, being the host, to remove the Fireflies AI note taker, which is automatically coming for some of my meetings.
Come again, please.
Sorry. Hello, I'm Suresh,
Yes,
and I would request you to remove that Fireflies AI note taker, which is automatically coming. You being the host, you can remove it. I am not able to remove it from the scene. That's why.
Remove what again, sir?
There is somebody named Fireflies AI note taker.
No, sir, I don't see that on my screen. I'm sorry.
Okay, maybe you are not able to see it, but still.
So there is a attendee with the name Fireflies AI note taker,
which you can remove, which I may not be able to because I'm not the host, but it automatically comes to my meeting. That's why. So it's a recording thing. So you can just remove it because I usually use it for some other meetings, but it automatically came for this. That's why I was requesting you to do this.
All right, I've done so. At the moment, put him in the waiting room. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
So good evening, everyone. It's 4 p.m., but we'll give it another 3 to 4 minutes, letting all participants join in. Thank you for your cooperation. So good evening, everybody. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to the MSH AWS Tech Connect series, session 2, Build and Scale with AWS. I'm Taina Majithia, legal consultant, Innovation IPR Division to the Ministry of Electronics and IT, and I shall be your moderator for the session. MSH and AWS have collaborated for the benefit of the startup community in India. Our first session will be taken up by Ms. Vaishali Sagar. Ms. Sagar is Program Manager, Startup RAM Program, AWS Public Sector India, who will be throwing light on the AWS Startup RAM Program, Build and Scale with AWS. Over to you, Vaishali.
Thank you so much, Taina. I'll just present my screen. And I hope you can see it right now. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Taina and MSH team for organizing this. I think it's a great way to see how we could work along and support the startup community out there. And as Taina mentioned, I'm here to probably give you a sneak peek of the public sector startup program that we're running in India, which is called Startup RAM Program. This is a virtual acceleration program that's run globally, and we've launched this across APJ in the last couple of weeks as well. But India is the first country to kick off the program as we speak, and would love to see how we could have a few of you apply, or most of you apply for the program. Just to give you a little detail about the program, this is a program to see how we could engage, nurture, and support the startups who are focused on public sector solutions or working across with different states, central, and the local governments. And we'd want to see how do we support them right from their early stages of inception. And we have a two-tier support model. One is for the early stage startups, and one is for the late stage or the growth stage startups. We understand that there are different challenges when you're trying to work at different stages and at different sectors. We'd want to see how we could create a roadmap for you so that we could make it a sort of a smooth ride for you as you percolate with the challenges on the public sector side. I could quickly move. Yeah. And the sectors that we're trying to support from a program perspective, these slides will be shared with you separately after the session so that you could go through them for reference. And there is a publicly available website where you could log into to see and apply for the program as well. But right from aerospace to agriculture, we're trying to see how do we support the public sector startups across other sectors like smart city, utilities, health tech, agri, civic tech, citizen services, in case if you're working towards these conversations. The eligibility criteria is pretty simple. How, in case if you're an early stage startup, you have to be founded in the past 2 years and must be pre-revenue. If you're a member tier, other growth stage startups, we would want to see how you could how you're founded in the last 10 years and not exceeding the 100 crore revenue. And I think the mandatory criteria from a program perspective that we're looking at is how you're addressing either a current or a future public sector challenge, and how you're solving it for the public sector customers in India as we speak. That's something that we're looking at. As I said, these slides will be shared with you so that you could go through them in detail, and would want to see how do we give you more time with respect to the tech session that we have today. But if I could quickly call out the benefits that you see on the screen, this is a snapshot of the benefits that we're offering as a part of the program. This is not a cohort specific program. This is absolutely free program that the AWS team is running to see how we could support for the startups and create those structures so that you could scale up. We're trying to provide you with the resources, relevant relationships, and also extended technical support, where we tend to support you with the architecture, design, optimization reviews, security and scalability readiness, and also make you a part of the larger community at AWS and Amazon. We obviously start off with the financial support. From an AWS perspective, the financial support that we usually look after when it comes to startups is the promotional credits. So we could get you started on credits as a part of the program in case if you think you're solving it for public sector and some use cases that are relevant here. And also the go-to-market piece, which is quite important for you as you're trying to strengthen the work that you're trying to do in the B2G ecosystem, right from opening doors for you internally and externally, and also connect you with the large network of public sector business that we have in India with the AWS public sector team here. And we also create some case studies that I'm going to probably speak of in the next couple of slides. And if I could quickly clarify of what we do and what we don't, is pretty clear, as you could see on the screen. We don't invest cash and take a capital position, but we do the rest of the things that you see on the right from investing time, taking a long-term view, leveraging our consistent global footprint, ensuring there's market access for you that's available across other geographies or other territories and regions as well, and how we could share knowledge and experience from the domain tech perspective. Quickly moving on, a couple of innovation challenges that you see on the screen that we've been a part of while working across with different state and central governments, and also the global challenges. We worked with the Government of Maharashtra with their AI Innovation Challenge, where we curated and sourced a couple of startups who were working on AI in 2019. Worked with the Government of West Bengal on innovation as a theme in 2019. And during the pandemic, we worked with TAIM and NASSCOM, to see how we could work across with startups who are trying to work with a digital agriculture space. And that's something that we did in 2020. And also, I think the most important topic of the pandemic, which is finding solutions in startups who are working with health tech as a theme. We worked with GenCare and BIRAC as well as a part of this conversation, and worked across with DigiYatra Central Ecosystem, and curated a bunch of these aviation startups as well. We enable industry connects as well as a part of the larger charter that we handle at Startup Ramp program, where we do domain-specific conversations, which were previously in person, but right now, given the situation, we've kind of moved them to the online webinar format like this, that we would love to see how we could support you offline and online as well, and be ready to create those structures as and when required for the respective domain. Quick snapshot of the case studies that you could probably read, probably see on the screen, and also can read once we share on email. But this is what we do based on the solutions that you're trying to create with respect to the use cases, and ensure we create enough collaterals and support you with the marketing and the branding efforts as well, and ensure we create a booklet of the GovTechs and the solutions that you've been working across from your organizations. These are a couple of GovTechs who've been a part of the AWS cohort or the AWS platform in India as we speak. GovTechs, so those startups are working with keeping government as an end customer out there. Any questions I'm happy to answer on chat, or I'll be available in case if you think you need a follow-up. But thank you so much, Tana, and would love to see how we could support from here.
Good evening, madam. I'm Lokesh speaking.
Can we please request, sir, could you please put in your queries in the chat box? They'll be taken up by me at the end. That's your request.
It's a long message, madam. When we're chatting, the time will be completed in the chat box chat only, madam. Thank you so much, madam.
Right, we just request everybody to send in their queries in the chat box, and I will be duly entertaining them as your moderator at the end of the session. Thank you for cooperation. Our next presenter is Mr. Gaurav Singh, Senior Solutions Architect, AWS Public Sector India. So we'll be throwing light on the AWS overview and architecting for high availability. Over to you, Gaurav.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to talk with the wider community today. So I'll be presenting, as I just mentioned, I'll first give an overview about what AWS is, what are the capabilities that we bring onto the table, and how you can use those capabilities. And in the second half of my presentation, I'll talk about architecting solutions for high availability. So let me just share my screen. I'll just stop the video and I'll share my screen. Okay. All right. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes, Gaurav.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'll quickly start. I'll not take much time in the overview. So as you would know, right, AWS is a public cloud provider, and it gives you all those capabilities, which any organization or a startup would need to host their workloads on the cloud and take the leverage the massive scaling capabilities of the cloud. Right? So with AWS, if we talk about this particular slide, you can see that AWS has been recognized as a cloud leader for last 11 years. And this is all attributed to the success which our customers have derived out of using the AWS services, which had led us to this particular success in this domain. If I talk about the presence of AWS, right? So there are about 25 regions which are available globally, which are depicted here on this map. And there are 2 regions which you can see are depicted in India, and one of them is in orange. And I'm really happy to share this information. So currently in India, AWS has 1 region which is based, which is located in Mumbai. And it's called Asia Pacific South region. And there is another region which has been announced, and it will be coming up in another year's time. By the mid of next year, this region would be available, and it will be situated in Hyderabad. So AWS would have 2 regions going forward in India from the mid of the next year, tentatively. When we talk about the AWS region, and when we talk about the resiliency and the high availability and how it enables you to scale, right? So generally, it comes to the mind, okay, AWS has got only 1 region in India, and what happens if that region is not available, or there is a problem with that region? What will happen to my workload, right? So I just wanted to break that myth. The way the AWS design its region, right? So the AWS regions are comprised of multiple availability zones. Unlike other cloud infrastructure providers, each AWS region has multiple availability zones, and each availability zone has got physically separated data center, right? So here I've just extrapolated 1 region. So in a region, you would have multiple availability zone, and each availability zone is made up of multiple data centers, right? So it's not a single data center. So by comparison, if you compare us with other cloud providers who claim to have about 50 regions globally, they don't have this availability zones kind of an architecture, and they just have a single data centers. So it's not comparable to the multi-AZ architecture and the high availability and resiliency that AWS provides you. And each region also has 2 independent, fully redundant transit centers, which you can see here, that allows traffic to cross the AWS network, enabling regions to connect to the global network, right? So there are no single point of failures when we design our data centers, and it ensures that you have the full capability, that your workloads are always available for you and for your customers. Moving on. So as I said, right, so this represents again 1 single availability zone with multiple data centers, which are connected through dedicated high throughput network, and which gives you the capability to deploy your application always 24/7. Moving forward, I'll also talk about the breadth of services. So we offer the broadest range of services to you, starting, if you'll see, I'll just drag it on the side. So it's just not about the compute network and the storage. We understand that our customers need in terms of running analytics workloads, in terms of doing AI, ML, in terms of doing augmented reality or virtual reality. So there are different categories which you see on this particular slide. It's a little busy slide, right? But this shows the deepest cloud expertise that AWS brings onto the table. And there are solutions, there are capabilities available to address most of your use cases which you would encounter in your journey, right? So wherever there is a gap, or wherever you find that this particular service is not offering the features that my application would read, so there is an extensive and very rich AWS marketplace where you get third-party solutions offering these services, and those are tested and proven solutions across the globe, and you can always choose to bring in the solutions from the marketplace natively onto the AWS cloud. So moving on. Sorry. So here I'm talking about the infrastructure essential components. So when we talk about the cloud, so even if we compare it with our on-prem deployments, right, there are the three core components for deploying an application. One is the networking, the other one is the compute resources, and the third one is the storage resources, right? So there is again services available in each of these core components, which you can use to define your virtual private cloud within the AWS region where you want to deploy your applications. There are different compute resources, starting with Amazon EC2 to machine images to the elastic load balances capabilities, which you can leverage. And then for storage, again, you have multiple options available. So if I talk about Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, which we call as a VPC, right? So Amazon VPC is an isolated section of a AWS cloud. So when you provision your account with AWS, you get a virtual private cloud VPC enabled, right, by default. And you can go and create as many number of VPCs as you would want in your account. So Amazon VPC provides you this set of tools that enables you to completely control your networking environment. You can select your own IP address ranges, you can create subnets, you can configure route tables, etc. And it also enables you with the unique security features that let you control and create additional layer of defense in your environment so that you can allow which subnets can talk to each other, which are the source IPs from where the traffics are allowed, and how you want to block that, right? So you can easily customize the network configuration as per your requirements. You can create public subnets, you can create private subnets, you can deploy your web servers in public subnets or your load balancer in public subnets, and databases in the private subnets, or the application layer in the private subnets. So once you have a network in place, your VPC in place, the next thing is about the compute, right? So compute is at the core of nearly every AWS customer infrastructure. So whether it is in the form of instances, virtual machines, or if you are deciding to deploy containers or serverless applications, we deliver and give you a choice in how many ways you would want to deploy your applications. So related to the compute, right? So I'll not go into the detail of this slide, but here what I'm trying to say is there is a wide variety of different compute resources which are available, the virtual machines which are available in different combinations. So you can get general purpose machines, you can get machines which are compute optimized or memory optimized, and there are different options of the processors, underlying processors, which are powering these machines. So you are free to choose whether you want to go with an Intel machine or an AMD machine, or for that matter, a ARM-based Graviton machine, which AWS provides, right? So now you have so much of compute VM instances available, right? So the choice of orchestrator is also important, right? So let's say you don't want to deploy your application directly on a virtual machine. Everyone is doing containers, right? So the choice of orchestrator is also important. And it's a key integration point that we deeply influence the rest of your choices, what you want to deploy. So we have two different AWS customer have the choice of deploying ECS, which is Elastic Container Service, and Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Services. So these two are available on the AWS, which you are free to choose the way you would want to deploy, right? But then again comes the question, which one should we go with, right? So both services support a array of compute options. We have a deep integration with the AWS services and provide a global scale and reliability that you expect from your container workloads. Now you can run your containers in multiple ways. You can run your containers on a serverless way, which is the option called the AWS Fargate, where you don't want to bother about deciding which machine types should I choose for my worker nodes, whether it should be compute optimized or it should be a memory optimized, or I would want to go 4 vCPUs and 60 GB RAM. So you don't want to make those decisions. So you are free to use AWS Fargate, right? It's a serverless container compute engine where you only pay for the resources required to run your containers. Similarly, you can, if you're running an workload on EC2 instances, virtual machines. So I showed you in the previous slide. So there is a wide variety available there. There are options where if from the compliance perspective, or if you're working with a customer who have a requirement that their data cannot leave their location because of the compliance reasons or any legal reasons. So there are options where you can run these Elastic Kubernetes services or Elastic Container Services on-prem and on an appliance which is called AWS Outpost. So all these options are available for you to choose from. And the last thing, which is the storage. So there are different storage options from starting from the object to the block, file, and backup. And multiple tools are available which enables you to transfer your data from different sources. You can take the data which you might have on-prem currently in your local offices, and you want to put it on cloud, right? So there are different tool sets which are available, which would enable you to do that and help your customers to transfer their data to AWS Cloud. So lastly, the last layer is the last core component, in fact, is the databases, right? So there is a plethora of managed databases which are available, starting with the relational databases, which is AWS Aurora and RDS. Then we have a wide variety of DynamoDB, DocumentDB, Elasticache, which are NoSQL databases. And finally, you can also run your analytic workloads using the native services which are available. So having these native services, you can also, if you are already invested in the technologies outside of the cloud native technologies, you can always bring those technologies. So you can always run your Mongo or a Cassandra database or a Memcache database onto the cloud. So these options are also available, and you would not see any limitations in bringing these workloads onto the cloud. All right, so let's switch some gears here. So I talked about an overview of AWS. We talked about the breadth of services which are available. But now let me introduce AWS for a startup, right? How it is important for you, right? Vaishali has already talked about these customer and case studies, and here is a QR code link, right? We'll share the slide deck, but if you want to go and download the complete case studies and learn about how these startups have used the AWS services, feel free to scan this QR code and download the ebook for these. We also have startups from the commercial sectors, right, who have been using AWS, right, and from Make My Trip to Paytms, right. So India's top startups, they built on AWS, but they did not do it alone, right. AWS has the foundation that you need to start building quickly and easily. So we continuously expand our services to support virtually any cloud workload, and now we have more than 200 fully featured services for you to consume. So if I talk about in 2020, right, in the last year, we released about 2,700 significant features and services, right, for you to use. And with these broad and deep offering, it's common for the startups to look at AWS to start the journey. But having talked about so many services and so many feature releases in last 1 year, so it's an obvious question. So where do we start, right? As a startup, where do I start, right? So this is a very famous quote which says that if you aren't embarrassed by the first version of your product, you shipped too late, right? So agility and the time to market is very important factors for the startups, right? So you get an idea, right? You do some research, you understand the services your customer might need, right? And the features they would need, and you manually deploy, you quickly build that prototype and you test it, you validate it with your customer, whether you would whether it is aligned with their requirements or not. And then you reiterate and you either throw that away or you take it forward and move forward, right? So this is how the journey for a particular startup would start, right? So you can, for example, in this particular example, a startup might deploy a web application on an Amazon EC2 compute instance, right? You think of an EC2 as a virtual machine which you can launch in AWS Cloud. And here you have a single virtual machine with all the components of your application deployed on a single machine, right? So it's a very small component which is running your complete workload. And you can use it for demonstration, prototyping, deploying, testing, whatever you want. So the next stage of the startup would come when you start decoupling, right? So as the application evolves, you discover that you have a greater need for more scalable storage, and you don't want to spend time or effort managing your own databases. So you adopt Amazon Simple Storage Services, which is called Amazon S3, and Amazon Relational Databases Services. And the application is now decoupled from the storage and database. And you can scale them independently. Your web servers and your storage would scale independently. The next stage of scaling which comes, right, it turns out that the startup has now found an amazing product, which is a great market fit, and now need to scale across multiple dimensions. So you start to horizontally scale your applications by adding another EC2 instance for performance and reliability. You add elastic load balancing to distribute your requests. You start using RDS read replicas. So the reads does not impact the database write operations and the performance of your databases. And you introduce a standby instance for database reliability and high availability. So for frequently accessed data, you start using Amazon Elastic Cache and to produce and provide a fully managed in-memory cache for serving the requests, which are extremely fast. So this example highlights how building on AWS allows your startups to begin at a point where you are comfortable with and then gradually adopt services and features as they become relevant to your needs. So you don't have to invest and put everything in place from the day one. You can always keep experimenting and bringing those flavors of the components which are required by your application in time. So now let's get back to the second part of our presentation today, which is architecting for high availability, right? So we understand now that what are the capabilities cloud brings for startups, how we map those capabilities, how at the different stages of our journey we would be using those, right? So now let's look at the how we would design for high availability and resiliency in the cloud. Right. So this is a very famous quote by Werner Vogel, who is a Amazon CTO, and he says that everything fails all the time, right? So we do not need to accept failures in our systems. Instead, we build systems that work despite those failures. So my system needs to be highly available. It doesn't matter if a component fails, right? And when we talk about that, we needed to build systems that embrace failure as a natural occurrence, right? We talk here as we, right? So there is a shared responsibility model. So AWS is responsible for reliability of the cloud. So AWS would ensure all the cloud features and services, they are available. They are highly available for you. And as a customer, as a consumer of the cloud, you would be responsible for the reliability in the cloud. So reliability of your application lies in your hand. And today we are going to focus on how you're going to, what are the design patterns which you can follow for the reliability in the cloud for your applications. So the one important thing which I would like to call out here is the high availability is not a disaster recovery, right? So high availability is something which addresses the component failure. So if there is a component which is critical, if it fails, your application should not fail. It should still be serving your customers, right? Whereas DR is more about, sorry, is there a question? All right. So DR is more about the business continuity in the face of larger events. So if there is actual disaster, a natural disaster, how do you continue your business and keep serving your customers? So now let me walk you through this particular architecture diagram, right? So this example is a simple 3-tier architecture, which is making use of 3 availability zones. So you can consider this as a AWS Mumbai region, right, which has got 3 availability zones, A, B, and C. And here the application 3-tier architecture application is deployed, right? So now starting with here is the elastic load balancer. The traffic from your customers is hitting your application within your VPC. So this is your AWS account where the traffic would hit in, right? So though the diagram is not depicting elastic load balancer in the 3 availability zones, but ELB is a managed services which is available. When you deploy, it asks you how many availability zones you would want your elastic load balancing to be working in, right? So you choose that, okay, 1, 2, and 3, and your elastic load balancer, which is your ELB, is now highly available and available for you to use. And so are your EC2 instances. These are the instances where you have deployed your application. And then there is an auto scaling group enabled. So this is a feature and a capability which can monitor the demand of your service, which can predict or which monitors the actual KPIs and matrices, and then send an alert to auto scaling group to ask it to add more machines as and when traffic is increasing, and then it can evenly place the machine in different availability zones so that your application is highly available. There is no single point of failure, right? So the RDS is also multi-AZs, right? So when you deploy your relational databases on AWS, you have this capability where you can say, deploy my database as a multi-availability zone database. So what it does is it creates read replica or a standby copy in another availability zone, and there is a continuous synchronous replication which is happening, and all your database copies are up to date. So in case there is a failure in one, automatically the cloud would take care of routing all your traffic to your standby and or read replica, or promote your read replica to become a master node. S3 and DynamoDB, which you see on the right hand side, which is your storage and your NoSQL databases. These services are automatically replicated, right? So the data and the compute is automatically. So whenever you provision these, they are never deployed in a single AZs. On the back, behind the scenes, these services are always available in multiple AZs. So the impact to one availability zone will never impact your availability or connectivity to your storage, whether it's an object storage or a NoSQL database. All right. So we talked about these three things. So we saw this diagram, right? So where we said that one availability zone has got multiple data centers, right? So now what happens, let's say one of your availability zone goes down, right? In this case, your high availability strategy meets your DR needs also, because the application, the previous diagram which we have seen, has deployed my application in multiple availability zones, which are discrete data centers, which are at least 50 kilometers apart from each other. My application would still be serving the customers, right? So let's say there is a local flood issue which takes these two data centers out of service, right? But in case the application would still be functioning. And this is how I'm representing here, right? So my availability zone B has gone down, but still, because the application is multi-AZ, my application is still functioning. My Elastic block storage, which is attached to my instances, I am keeping snapshots of those volumes, and those snapshots are kept in a S3 storage bucket, which is an object storage. And in case I have to recover or spin up new instances also, this gives me a capability to restore from there as well. Amazon DynamoDB and simple storage services, they have the point in time restore. So in case there is a manual issue, right? So we talked about some disaster which has happened due to a natural reasons, but let's say there is a man-made issue, right? A human issue, manual error where you deployed or you deleted a database table by mistake, right? So Amazon DynamoDB gives you the point in time backup capability where you can say, okay, go back 10 minutes before in the past and give me the table which was there, right? So you would always be able to recover from that. And similarly, AWS S3 has a versioning capability. So whenever the objects are written in AWS simple storage service and versioning is enabled, so you can always go back in case you have any failure on an object level. So next question could be like, what happens if the whole region goes down, right? So this would be a very, very rare event, right? Where you are unable to operate a workload in a particular region. So we still have multiple strategies there which we can follow, right? So we can have a multi-region deployment. As I was mentioning at the beginning of my presentation, so there would be an additional region available in India, right? So you can always deploy your application in 2 different regions and keep the second region as a passive region. And whenever there is a failure in one region, you can start routing your traffic. You can first bring up your machines if they are in a passive state, and then you can start routing your traffic to your secondary region. Right. You can also have another pattern could be where you can have an active kind of deployment of two different regions, and based upon the proximity of your users, you can direct the traffic to one of those regions. And this will ensure that in case there is a region outage, you can tell your traffic routing policies that, okay, if any particular region is not accessible or facing any issues, start routing all the traffic to the region which is available, right? So this would ensure, so these two high availability patterns, deployment patterns which we saw, right? So this gives us the ability for your workload to perform as it's required, and function correctly and consistently over an expected period of time, right? So no matter what, if there is a component which is going down, your application is still functioning as required. And this is a very important one of the pillar in a well-architected framework which AWS publishes, right? So you can always go to this particular URL and you will get a very detailed and very useful information in terms of designing your workloads. And reliability is one very important pillar of a well-architected framework out of the 5 pillars, and you would be able to understand in much deeper details with many examples of how customers have used this pillar to define their reliability requirements. So now we have seen some deployment options, whether I do a multi-AZ deployment, I can do active passive, I can do active. So when we start creating our application, so as a startup, right, I'm just starting up, I don't have that many number of users, but I'm sure that the idea which we are bringing to the table, very quickly we are going to scale massively, and we don't want to end up to do things after going live, right? So there are certain design principles for reliability and high availability, which we can talk about, right? Which are these 5 which I'm bringing now. So let's think about how we might think about a reliability in a traditional environment, right? So we often test if things work normally, right? We check if it meets the expectation. The functional testing is there, performance testing is there, and the security testing is there. But we rarely test what happens after things fail, right? So the first time we test our recovery processes is in the middle of a live reliability failure. So when our application would go down first time, that is the time when you would start testing. Now, what do we do? How we fixed it? How we ensure that service comes back normally and start serving the customers again. This is why you used to see a lot of systematic failures, right? So when X fails, then Y fails, and Y being the thing we never got to test, right? So there could be a feature in your application which requires a user to enter an OTP into your application. But let's say there's a component which sends the OTP is down. Now, though your application, everything is working fine, but the whole application is now not accessible, right? So have we tested that? What happens? How we recover from that situation? So when a failure occurs, we manually fix it. And if it happens a lot, we write down the procedures for fixing, which is a very manual process. And then we had to guess how much we needed, right? So if we got that wrong, we had long provisioning times also, right? So failures failures are not only happening because the underlying infrastructure is not available or there is a bug in a service. What if a lot of traffic comes suddenly on your site and your services are overwhelmed, right? So you have to scale out in that short amount of time to absorb that amount of traffic, right? So on a daily basis, let's say if your user base is growing at a rate of 2 to 3%, the infrastructure which you have got on-prem might not be enough to support that need, right? But on the cloud, you can quickly turn around and you can put an auto scaling to add the capacity. But from the on-prem perspective, how do you test it? How you have to make a guess, right? How much capacity you would need. So you would upfront procure that. So, and we made change to the environments manually, right? So whenever the new things are going to add in my deployments, or a new component is going to be ready or released, right? So the processes are generally manual, right? Which introduce an opportunity for human error and then the Snowflake servers. So the reliability design principles to ensure that high availability of my application is maintained. When we are designing the application, we must think about all these 5 parameters and then work towards deploying our application, right? So let's see these one by one. So when we talk about automatically recover from failure, what we are saying is that we can use on the cloud, we can use services to automate these things, right? So we can use Amazon auto scaling. So if there is a server which has gone down because there was an issue with the latest OS upgrade, or there was a corruption in the file system, or anything which has happened, right? So the auto scaling can take care of that. That server is not healthy, there is an auto healing mechanism in place, which can fix it. Amazon Relational Databases Services, right? It automatically creates read replicas for you. It creates multi-AZ databases for you, right? So it helps you automate very, very quickly. Route 53 is your highly available DNS service, right? You can quickly put the routing rules that, okay, I have got my application on a standby mode in a different AZ or a different account. Now I should simply start routing my traffic there. And we know that S3 is already highly resilient to the failures, because whatever data you put in S3 maintains 3 copies in 3 different availability zones for you, right? So in case there is a failure, your data is always available for you transparently, and the endpoint would still return your data. The second thing which is important while designing the application for high availability is the stateless services enable automatic recovery, right? So if the services are not stateless, automatic recovery could be really hard to achieve. So to recover from many failures, like killing and replacing an EC2 instance, it's often a good approach. So what auto-scaling group can do, it can simply spin up a new machine fresh with a fresh deployment and remove the old one, right? But if you're maintaining a state on that particular machine, on a corrupt machine, then you cannot do that, right? So you need to configure, if you have to take the benefit of this, so you need to configure auto scaling to do this with the right health checks in place, and you design your application to be stateless. So you offload your state to stores like Elastic Cache, which is a Redis cache, or a DynamoDB. What auto scaling would then do, it will drain your corrupt server, or it will drain the server which is not functioning, and it will bring in a new instance which is healthy, right? So here, one of the server goes offline, auto scaling group gets a notification that the server is unhealthy, and it brings a new one. So this is an auto healing which takes place. So it is important that when you're designing your application, you ensure that you are not putting flavors of statefulness in your application. Always go for a stateless kind of an architecture. Then we can also recover automatically from the failovers if there is a dependency on a region, right? Let's say because of any reason, a particular region is now not available, right? So Amazon Route 53, because you have a standby available in region 2, you can simply start routing your traffic to the second region. And Route 53 health check can monitor your workload endpoints and fail over to a different region if failure is detected at the Route 53 level. And multiple availability zone RDS databases here at the, below in the diagram, right, will be automatically fail over to the secondary regions, right? Because that's the native capability of RDS. So if it detects a failure in the master or a primary node, it starts redirecting the traffic to the replica node. So second design principle is always test your recovery processes, right? To ensure that high availability is there, ensure you have tested how you will recover from failures, right? So there are various tools which are available in the open source community, like Chaos Monkey, right? You can use this chaos engineering tools, and you can test these processes if time permits for your, but this will bring in a lot of relief when you would have an actual incident happening, right? Because you would have tested it up front, you would have a full confidence your application would be available and it will not be down. So scale, the next is the scale horizontally to increase aggregate workload availability, right? So we have seen this diagram multiple times now, right? So when we talk about scale horizontally, so this is again a Mumbai region with 3 availability zones. Every availability zone has got multiple data centers. So if your application is deployed across, as we have seen in this particular diagram, failure in one part would not impact your availability, right? And when we say scale horizontally, so let's say there are 2 different ways of scaling. You can either scale vertically, you can increase the size of your machine. Here in C5 large, let's take an example. There are 2 vCPUs and 8 GB RAM, but in X large, there could be 4 vCPU and 60 GB RAM. So you can do the vertical scaling, but you can also do the horizontal scaling, where you have many more number of servers, underlying servers hosting your application. So here, if one server goes down, your availability, high availability reduces to 75%. But if you have more number of machines, if you have scaled horizontally, if one goes down, your capacity is reduced to 87.5, which is higher than the vertical scaling, right? So you can also consider, based upon your workload requirements, which way or which scaling mechanism you would prefer for your application. So stop guessing the capacity, last point. So in an on-prem way, right? So you will always think that when we grow, we might need 4 instances. Someone would argue why we would need 4, we might need only 3, or no, we might need 5, right? So you don't have to do all that. You can always in the cloud configure your auto scaling rules. You would monitor the right metrics using the metrics which are published by these instances in the CloudWatch. CloudWatch is a monitoring and a dashboarding tool where you see the performance, the availability of your services, your application. So you can always trigger alarms in CloudWatch. So whenever my CPU is touching 60% or my RAM utilization is touching a certain percentage, or if the amount of traffic is hitting that much, right, go and increase the number of instances in my availability zones, right? And it will automatically keep adding those instances in the chosen availability zones for you evenly. And finally, manage the changes in automation. Try to avoid doing a manual builds. So someone does a build, configures a server manually, right? And that person is not available, or due to any reason, right, you have to do a change, or you are not able to figure out what was the change because there is no version history which is maintained, right? So AWS provides you the capability which is called AWS CloudFormation, where you can spin up your environment using infrastructure as a code capability. So you define a template of your environment. You say, this is a virtual instance, this is the configuration, this is my code deployment package, there is a container image which is residing, bring in all those together and spin up a new instance for me, which auto scaling would also use, right? So if you'll put an automation in place, if you'll invest in CloudFormation, it will guarantee that there are no instances where you have Snowflake servers, which are very hard to debug and predict what went wrong and why it went wrong, right? It is a very repeatable process here. All right, so I talked about this reliability pillar and what we can do to ensure that when we design applications, what are the things which we need to keep in mind for ensuring a high availability and resiliency. All these points were taken from our, as I mentioned in between, that AWS publishes well-architected framework, and reliability is a very important pillar in well-architected framework. So you can go to these URLs, you can scan this QR code and learn more about these best practices and the questions which other customers ask about how to ensure high availability on the cloud. So that's pretty much about my presentation today. If you would have any questions, feel free to put in the chat window and I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Gaurav. Your session was truly insightful, and thank you for such an enriching presentation. I think we can stop screen share and take up the questions. Vaishali, the first question would be for you. What is the timeline for the RAMP program?
Thanks, Anna. I think from a timeline perspective, we don't really have a timeline, for the application. So it's rolling applications. You could apply whenever you think you're ready for scaling and the support that we have from a program perspective. And it's a very tailor-made, way of doing things. We will work along with you on the technology, GTM, and the other tracks, so that we'll go ahead with these things.
Right. Thank you, Vaishali. Before moving ahead, in the interest of time, everybody in the audience, we will be taking up as many questions as we can to the best of our ability. Next being to both Gaurav and Vaishali, what level or type of technical support do you provide, and what support do you provide to non-profit organizations?
Gaurav, you want to take a shot at it and I'll follow up if that's okay?
Sure, Vaishali, right. So when when you have a use case, right, where you are coming to us and you wanted to understand. So there is a from the learning perspective, there is a dedicated portal where you can go and take advantages of a lot of free trainings, starting from basics to intermediate to advanced, which are self-paced trainings, which you can enroll and get yourself ramped up on using AWS. There are sites which we offer, which is called This Is My Framework. It's a service where you see a lot of startups come and talk about how they have architected their applications, and it gives you a deep insight into what are the challenges they faced and how they address those challenges and how they have delivered for their customers. So that would be a second option, right? We also conduct trainings based upon the requirements, right? So if you have any particular need, you would always you're always welcome to reach out directly to us, and we will try to arrange a game day or a hackathon for you. Not a hackathon, to be precise, an immersion day, which is a hands-on lab experience for you in a particular technology area which you are interested to deep dive in. And we can always invite you to the webinars, right? So there are monthly trainings which are marketing teams which are exposing, which helps you prepare for the certifications, which helps you prepare or learn more about a particular service which AWS is offering, or a new features which are coming. And we publish that on the sites as well as the newsletter. So you can always enroll for those and get the insights. From the support in terms of NPO, I would let Vishali answer that, but we have different programs, I think they're available, where you can take advantage of.
Thanks, Gaurav. Just to, I think, add to what Gaurav has said, with respect to programs, we have a bunch of them which are available both for not just for MPO, but also B2B, B2C, and the B2G ecosystem out there with respect to the Activate program that we run from a commercial point of view, and public sector point of view, the Startup Ramp program that I've mentioned. And also EdTech startups have another program called EdStart. So we'll be happy to see how we could connect you to these respective programs, and we'll see how we could take advantage of the one-to-one sessions that we do, which are more of immersion days and architecture reviews, etc., which will be a depth engagement. And with respect to the breadth engagement, we usually do a lot of these open houses and webinars where you would get a chance to, get a quick perspective about that respective sector or the domain that you're trying to work along with. And from a technical architecture perspective, what's happening, on that particular domain. We usually talk about some reference architectures and reference case studies as well. That'll be helpful. But if there is a particular topic, if I could just quickly add on and plug in the office hours that we have set up for the MSH cohort, we have a dedicated time that's available on the 22nd from 3 to 4 p.m. where Gaurav will be available for any specific technical questions, not just with respect to what you heard today, but if you have anything specific to your respective organization that you're trying to work with, please register, and we will share the invite for you to join so that you could ask those questions, and we'll keep that as an informal open house.
Right, Vaishali, the same message from MSH to the startup community. Thank you. The other two questions are now for you, Gaurav. Second data center is coming up in which city?
Yeah, all right. So I would not call it a data center, as I was explaining, right? It's a region which will have multiple availability zones, and this is coming up in Hyderabad.
Right. Okay. And where will the region placement in terms of the distance from one region to another be in case of a disaster? In case of disaster management.
Yeah. So our one region is already in Mumbai. The second one would be in the Hyderabad. So they are fairly far apart from each other.
Right. Thank you. So I hope this answers most of the queries. To all the audience and startup community out there, block your calendar for 22nd, that is Friday, where we meet again for AWS office hours, and any other further queries could be taken up in that session. I hope that's all right, Gaurav and Vaishali. So in the interest of time, yes, so in the interest of time, I think we would like to conclude thanking everybody for attending this session. Thank you, Vaishali and Gaurav, for being such wonderful presenters. Don't forget to follow Meti Startup Hub on all our social media handles. And just a big shout out to the startup community. Don't forget to Tech Connect. See you day after. It's an adios from me.
Thank you so much, then. Thanks, Gaurav.
Thanks you. Bye.